I just love apples, I love caramel. The two were meant for each other, and there's no better showcase than a tarte tatin, and what's better than a tarte tatin is a really big tarte tatin. Today we're trying something a little bit new. As you might know, I am a contributor on New York Times Cooking, and today I'm showing you a recipe that I developed specifically for NYT cooking, and it is a sheet pan tarte tatin. Normally tarte tatin is just like limited to the size of a skillet, but this is a large format. It's like double the size, and it's gonna be on nytcooking.com, so you can find the full recipe if you go to the description below. And it's really fun to make, and I feel like I kind of like cracked a little bit of a code here. I did a lot of searching online for like large format tarte tatin, sheet pan tarte tatin, and like I didn't find anything because it's always made in a skillet. The question that was posed was like, can there be a large format? Can you do it in a sheet pan, make it for a crowd? And I tested this recipe a lot, and I think you get all the benefits of like a delicious tarte tatin, but you get a bigger one. Oh yes. Because of the sugar in there, they basically like candy, and I love how almost like custardy the apples get. What I love about tarte tatin is that the ingredients are so simple and straightforward. I have 5.5 pounds, that is a ton of apples, 5.5 pounds of Pink Lady apples. You're better off going by the number of apples though. So 15 medium apples ends up being around 5.5 pounds. And I always use Pink Ladies. That to me is like the best supermarket apple to use for any kind of apple dessert. And this is a super long cooked recipe, so you want an apple that's gonna hold its shape. And I like Pink Lady because they have like a good sweet tart balance. You know, the farmer's market is like a different thing if you're making this during apple season. But for, you know, most of the year, you can find Pink Lady apples. So that's my top choice. I'm using a store-bought puff pastry. I like an all butter frozen thawed puff pastry. And yes, you could make your own puff, but it's kind of, this recipe is like a few steps. And so to me, it was just kind of like, let's at least like make one part of this a little bit easier and just go store-bought. And then for the rest of the tart, I have some butter. It's like 6 tablespoons of unsalted butter, 1 3/4 cups granulated sugar. This is some all-purpose flour just for rolling out, just for your puff pastry. Some vanilla paste, you can use extract, a little salt, some apple cider vinegar. We're gonna need a little bit of water here too. I have some heavy cream here that I'm gonna whip just for serving at the end, but that's it. It's like super straightforward. Equipment. This is where it gets specific because it's not the kind of recipe where it's like you can put it in any size pan, any kind of like sheet tray or sheet pan. You will need specifically a jelly roll pan. So that's what I have right here. A jelly roll pan, I tried this recipe in like a 1/4 sheet and a 1/2 sheet, and a 1/4 is too small and a 1/2 is frankly too big. So really the perfect size is a jelly roll pan. It's a 15 by 10 pan. And then I have a 1/2 sheet pan, which is a little bit bigger, and I just use this for baking the tart because it's like, just makes it easier and it catches drips. So you'll need both. Other than that though, it's really straightforward. I have a saucepan here because we're gonna cook the caramel, and that's really it. A rolling pin, that's really it. And like some aluminum foil for covering it. So the first step of pretty much any tarte tatin recipe is to make your caramel. And in most tarte tatin recipes, you start with a dry caramel in most cases. And that's because you have like a wide skillet. But here we're using so much sugar, basically double the amount that you would use in your typical tarte tatin, that we're actually gonna make a wet caramel because it's easier and it goes a little faster, frankly. And you can get more even cooking. So I have my sugar. I'm gonna add that to my saucepan. And then we're gonna add a 1/2 cup of water. So I'm gonna come over here and grab that. And whenever I add water for making a wet caramel, I kind of drizzle it around the sides. And this helps to ensure that I don't have any sugar crystals that are stuck to the sides, which could crystallize during cooking. It's just like a little precautionary step. Okay, so now we're gonna turn this on. And I like to cook over high heat with the caramel. It benefits from like a fast, hot cooking process. And I'm also gonna grab a pastry brush and my little cup of water, put an extra few tablespoons in here. And we're gonna use this is also a precautionary step where as the caramel is cooking, at least in the early stages, I like to go in with my wet pastry brush and brush down the sides to dissolve any sugar crystals. And that's because what you don't want is for your caramel to crystallize during cooking. So at the beginning, I can stir before it comes up to a boil, and the stirring is just to help encourage the sugar to dissolve. Here we are at a boil. No more stirring. I'm just going to keep an eye on it and periodically brush down any areas around the side where I see sugar crystals. Now, the reason you don't want to stir here is because stirring can encourage crystallization. So if there are undissolved sugar crystals, agitating could potentially cause crystallization down the road. You can swirl the pot. Swirling helps to even out the heat so it cooks evenly. What's happening is the bubbles are going from like boiling water bubbles, like rapidly bursting bubbles, to like larger, slower, more teeming bubbles that look kind of glassy. And I'm gonna start to develop some color. Like we're almost at that caramel stage. It takes on like a pretty reddish color. So now we're kind of getting into amber. Now I have a very, very fluid caramel. So I turn my heat back down to medium. I don't want to keep blasting it because then it can burn super quickly. It's kind of the color of like a really concentrated maple syrup. All right, I'm gonna turn off my heat. I'll allow a little bit of carryover. If you're working on a gas range or electric where like the elements are staying really hot, you can just take it off the heat entirely. I'm just gonna leave it on my induction burner. I'm now going to add my butter all at once, 6 tablespoons. This is gonna halt the cooking. I'm also going to add my salt. This is a 1/2 teaspoon of Diamond Kosher. And I'm going to whisk the mixture. So the whisk is just to help to emulsify the fat into your caramel, all that butter. And once the mixture is smooth, it's not bubbling anymore, and the caramel is still liquid, we're gonna pour it now into our pan. And I'm gonna just try to distribute the caramel evenly across the bottom. But don't worry too much about coating every square inch. The caramel, through the process of cooking, the caramel really kind of dissolves again. So like it's gonna fill in all of the contours of the pan. And the reason you want to work quickly is because at some point the caramel will start to harden. So careful because the pan is now hot because you poured that super hot caramel in, but you can sort of like tilt it if you need to, but don't stress about getting it full coverage. We're actually done with like the cooking portion of the recipe, so we don't need this anymore. And I'm going to set my jelly roll pan aside, and we're gonna turn to the apples. This would be a great time to preheat your oven. So I have my oven on 300. So it's a multi-step process. The first process is really about softening the apples and getting some of the liquid out. Liquid is really the enemy of a successful tarte tatin. And so we go at a low temp for the first trip to the oven. So I'm on 300. Now this part is a little time consuming, and it's just because we're using so many apples, like 5.5 pounds or 15 medium apples is a lot. I would say that the average tarte tatin has maybe around 3 pounds of apples, so we're almost double that amount. I have a peeler here, and whenever you're trying to get through a quantity of something in the kitchen, like for prep, what you should not do is like peel one apple, cut it in half, core it, and then repeat that for all the other ones. It's like you peel all of them, you have all of them, you core all of them, basically. I'm gonna peel all of these, and then I'll show you how to prep them and arrange them in the pan for that first round of baking in the oven. So I am gonna have them and core them. For coring them, I have a melon baller, which I could have called out under special equipment, but you could use just like a round teaspoon measure or even just like a spoon from your kitchen. There's another sort of half step that I do where I take the knife and I cut a notch in the stem end and in the bottom. And that's just to remove any core and stem and peel that are like still on there that you couldn't get with the peeler. So then once you do that, go in with your melon baller. Again, you could use like a round teaspoon measure, and then that's it. So I'm gonna repeat that now with all of the halves. Take the cores out, and then as I finish prepping them, I'm gonna place them on my jelly roll pan, rounded side down, scooped side up. And you don't need to take any kind of care as far as arranging them at this point, just fit them on the jelly roll pan. Here's my tray. You might think like this seems like a crazy amount of apple, but they shrink, first of all. Always like a big consideration with tarte tatin. And the caramel underneath, you'll notice, is hard when I tap it, so that has solidified. And what's going to happen on this first bake is the apples are going to soften. They're going to start to shrink a little. They're going to give off some of their liquid. In giving off the liquid, it is going to dissolve the caramel again. So I'm gonna give it actually a little bit of a head start to help to like create some steam inside of the pan. So I have 2 teaspoons of apple cider vinegar. I have 2 teaspoons of vanilla paste. You could use extract. And then I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of water. Now the apples are rounded side down because it doesn't really matter that much, but in my reasoning, they're going to start to absorb some of the caramel. And so better rounded side down because that's going to be the side that is going to become the top of the tart. I have here that combination of liquids, and I'm just going to pour it onto the caramel kind of in between the apples in a few different spots. But it's all going to like even out as it cooks. And now we want to cover it. If it's taken you a long time to prep your apples and they're turning brown, don't worry. They're all going to be caramelized. You're not going to be able to tell. If you have it, use some heavy duty aluminum. We want to make sure this is tightly covered. And again, the idea is to like trap some steam. I'm actually only going to cover the jelly roll pan. So the sheet tray is there really to help you get it in and out of the oven because it's heavy. And eventually it will be there to catch drips. I have a rack just in the center. Then I have another rack toward the top, like in the upper third. But for now, we're just gonna use that center rack and bake these at 300. For medium Pink Lady apples, that takes between 1 hour and 15 minutes and 1.5 hours. The doneness indicators are that the apple halves, the flesh has started to turn a little bit translucent. When you stick a cake tester or like a paring knife into the flesh, it should slide through with a little bit of resistance. Like this should be tender, but still have like a little bit of crispness basically. And they'll have started to give off their liquid. Apples have been baking for about 1 hour and 20 minutes. I'm going to pull them out. It smells very appley in here. So now before I even uncover them, I'm gonna get my oven ready for the next trip back into the oven. So I'm gonna turn the temperature up to 400. We're gonna crank it and the rest of the time it's gonna bake at 400. So now let's take a look at the apples. Yes, this is hot, but aluminum foil cools down super fast. So here are the apples. The apples have given off their juice. There's like liquid pooling in the little scooped out core, and the flesh is kind of semi-translucent. Here I have a cake tester. When I pierce the flesh, it slides through with just like a little bit of resistance. This is great. These are done. So you can use a slotted spoon or a pair of tongs. I'm gonna remove the apples, and you can see that where it was sitting in the caramel, for example, this half, it started to a little bit, like absorb a little bit of that caramel. That's why we did rounded side down. So I'm just going to transfer the apples out of the pan. This is bringing a little caramel with it, that's fine. What we need to do in the next step is concentrate all of those apple juices which have been released. And normally what would happen on the stovetop in a standard tarte tatin is you would cook the apples and you'd get all this evaporation and it would release the juices and everything would concentrate and thicken. So here we want to do that same thing but in the oven. So we're gonna put it back in uncovered. And this time we're gonna go on the top rack. And that's because I want that direct heat that's like radiating down from the top of the oven to really kind of blast the caramel. In the bottom of the pan, there's like little divots in the caramel where it has dissolved because it was in contact with the half of the apple. And then there's other patches of undissolved caramel. That doesn't really matter. It's all gonna dissolve when it goes back into the oven. Here we have our caramel with all of those apple juices and the semi-dissolved caramel. We're gonna put it back in the oven. And I'm going to put it in for 10 minutes. We wanna let this reduce, so it's gonna start bubbling quite a bit. We wanna let it get thicker and darker. And after 10 minutes, I'm gonna start to stir a little bit. Keep an eye on it every couple minutes, give it a little stir until it's really nice and dark and thick. So I'm taking each half once they've cooled a little bit, and I like to cut them crosswise into slices. So like lengthwise would be, like if this is the top and the bottom, it would be this way, but I like to go crosswise. I think you get a little more uniformity that way. So I'm gonna just slice this into 1/4 inch thick slices. This apple here got a little soft. It does not matter at all. You're not gonna be able to tell. You don't have to do this, but it is gonna make your life easier when you go to arrange the apples, is to like leave it in the form of the half. Try to keep that shape intact. And it's just gonna make it so that you can pick up a cluster of slices and fan them out and place them quickly. So I'm just gonna go through and I'm gonna slice every single one. I do have 30 halves because I started with 15 apples. And these are not like super thin slices. They're a little bit chunkier, but that's I think you just get the best overall effect with slices like this. Let me give my caramel a stir. I'm almost done slicing the apples. If you waited for the caramel to be done and then you started slicing, that's fine because we need the caramel to cool. This is after 13 minutes. It is not done yet. It needs to thicken further, but this is what it looks like. You can see that all of the caramel has melted. There aren't any solid patches on the surface, but it's still pretty liquid and it's still bubbling quite a bit. One thing that's cool about tarte tatin is part of what helps to thicken the juices so that it doesn't just like run, it's not just like liquid caramel running right off the apples, it's all the pectin in the apples. So there's like a real kind of viscosity to this, and a lot of it is from all that pectin. Okay, so this is gonna go back into the oven. It's gonna continue to reduce, and keep that foil from when you cover the apples, because when you go to bake it with the pastry on top, you might need to tent it with foil. So just hold on to that piece. So this is gonna go back into the oven to reduce further. And remember, we're on that top shelf. And now I'm just gonna continue slicing that last apple half. The caramel is done. It looks nice and dark, and it's thick and reduced. Look at that color. It's really sort of back to the color that it was when we originally cooked it in the saucepan. So you can see all of that liquid has kind of evaporated and been driven off. And now we have just this beautiful appley caramel. We need this caramel to cool down because one of the really great things about a sheet pan tarte tatin compared to the original is that you don't have to drape cold pastry over hot, like a hot skillet. So we're gonna wait a little bit. It's actually super cold outside, and just to speed things along, I'm gonna go stick this outside and it's gonna harden in like 2 minutes. And then we'll come back, arrange the apples, roll out our pastry, put on top, and bake it. So you can leave your oven on 400 because that's going to be the bake temp. I kind of want to put it on like the picnic table.
No shoes.
No shoes? Oh, you're not wearing shoes. I'm kind of wearing shoes. What I don't want to do is burn my hand on this very hot pan. Hold on a second. There we go. Oh God. Oh, how pretty. I'm tilting it so the caramel doesn't all go to one side. All right. Here is our cooled, mostly cold caramel. I think as it melted the snow, it leaned a little bit, so all my caramel's on this side, but as it cooks again, the caramel remelts and it's gonna bubble and like distribute. So I'm not worried about that. So now I wanna arrange my apples. When I was testing it, I did the rows lengthwise, and now maybe I'll do them crosswise. It doesn't really matter. And this is why I counsel you to leave the halves intact if you can, because you can just grab a bundle of like one apple half and fan out the slices and place them, and it's easy. So this is where I made the judgment call to arrange in slices rather than halves, because you can really just fill out all the gaps and take up all the space in your tart. And you're gonna pack them really, really tightly. Sometimes what I'll do, just because I think it looks best, is I might take off that little like end slice from the apple half, and I can use those to tuck into gaps, because they'll lay next to each other a little bit more nicely if you do that. And the idea is to fit all the apples that you have here. Another thing that happens when you slice the apple is it creates more surface area to sort of caramelize, to absorb the caramel. It's also to release juice, and it means that your apples are not at as high a risk of becoming mushy and like turning into applesauce. Like the more intact they are, the more likely they are to kind of burst because of something to do with cell walls. When you slice them, you don't really have that problem. And one thing I'm trying to do is trying to leave just a little bit of a gap, like enough to kind of slide my pinky finger between the apples and the edge of the pan on all four sides. That just leaves you a little bit of room to tuck your pastry. So now I'm gonna continue, and I'm gonna place all my apples and get all the slices kind of shingled, tightly packed, and arranged. I just think it looks better. It's the coolest visual effect when you alternate the direction of the slices. You might look at it and be like, wow, she has leftover, but I'm gonna really pack them in. You can layer them on top a little bit. I think tarte tatin should have a lot of apple in it. So to me, it's not a problem to like reinforce and shore up any thinner areas. You can grab like a couple slices at a time, and anywhere you see a little opening, you can put them in. The design is more freeform than you think it is. Like, even though I've done like a direction, and you know what? A lot of the point of this is that the slices are at an angle or a little bit upright so that the caramel can kind of evenly bubble up around and coat all the slices. I suppose you could like haphazardly just like throw them all in. It just means that some of the slices are going to get, if they're flat against the caramel, it just means that the ones that are against the caramel are going to get more caramelized than the ones that are like layered up on top. So now I just have my like little end pieces, and these I'm really going to kind of just throw in here, sort of focusing on the areas of the apple, like the little scooped areas from my halves. Raise your hand if you thought I wasn't going to fit all the apples. There's really two main brands of store-bought frozen puff pastry, and you want to let it thaw in your fridge overnight, like at least 12 hours. 24 is really better. Here we have just one single sheet. I'm going to get some flour down.
I never buy because I always just make the rough puff.
All right, Cal, little flex. Here is our sheet of Dufour, and we want to roll this out until it's a little bit bigger than the dimensions of our jelly roll pan. So that means until it's around 16 by 11. And you can be generous with the flour because you really don't want it to stick. So if you're using the brands that have two separate sheets, what you want to do is actually get them unwrapped and flat on the surface, brush off any excess flour, use a wet pastry brush or like a little spray bottle of water to spray one sheet with water, stack the other one on top, get it nice and lined up, and then you're going to roll it out. But here we have just one sheet. And another important thing is you want to keep it really off the surface, because what you don't want is for it to like be rolled out and stuck to the surface, and then when you go to move it onto your tart, it contracts and you can't really get like full coverage. You want to make sure you've really fully rolled it out to the dimensions you need. We are going to use a fork before I transfer it and prick the pastry all over. This just helps to prevent really dramatic puffing, and it helps to allow steam to escape. So one way to do this is to just roll it onto the rolling pin and unroll it onto your tart. And you want to try to center it as best you can. So now we want to tuck those edges under, like into the lip of the pan, just like so, all the way around. And now, because such an important part is evaporation, like there's more juice in these apples that need to be driven off. So I'm going to actually cut slits in addition to the fork pricks. Maybe just cut a couple of them all the way around because we need that steam to escape. Okay, my oven is still on 400. This is going to go back in. And I have that piece of foil from when I originally cooked the apples. I'm going to save that because I'm going to watch this, and I want to see dark, thick, bubbling caramel around the sides. That's going to take the better part of an hour, and the foil is there in case I start to see the pastry get really, really browned, and then we can tent it. So this is going to go in, and it's going to go on the center rack for 50 to 60 minutes. I just turned the oven off because the tart has been baking for an hour. At around 50 minutes or a little before, I checked it and I felt like I needed more time for that caramel to thicken. I also, at the 50-minute mark, started to tent it with foil just to prevent any further browning on the pastry. But I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to put it on the rack. Here you can especially see why I have the half sheet under it, because it did bubble over some of that caramel. Now, my pastry shrunk a little bit, so one thing you can do is like, while everything is hot, you can just seriously tuck those apples back underneath the pastry. So we have to let this cool for a little bit. When it comes straight out of the oven, the juices are super hot and very fluid. And if you were to turn it out, they would run all over your arms and hands and then also into the pastry, so you don't want that. So we do want it to set up a little bit. Once you start to see those juices thicken, you can flip it. So we'll come back. Really 15 minutes is like how long you want to leave it. This is ready to flip. When I look at the edges, I can see that the juices have really started to set. They're not gonna run all over the place. That being said, when you flip this, be very careful about hand protection because there will be drips in some places and you don't wanna get burnt. One of the queries during the testing was like, should we put a sheet pan, should we put like a rack over it and then a sheet pan to catch drips? And my concern is that it would crush the still hot pastry. So I'm just gonna go with the rack and making sure my hands are covered. This is a great use for oven mitts if you have oven mitts. If you're really unsure, you can put a sheet tray over this and just use that. So we're gonna flip it. Drips. Make sure you're protected. It's gonna be super hot. Ooh. So beautiful. I think this level of caramelization on the apples is spot on. It could be a little darker even. Because they gave off their juice and then the juice was reduced, they were able to absorb that caramel and fully caramelize all the way through. It like pulled that liquid caramel into the fruit. This is the reason for the slices is like there's no gaps. There aren't any like areas of exposed pastry or anything like that. So this is super hot, but it's also getting late and we gotta move it. We gotta move on. So I'm gonna cut a piece. It is better to like let it cool. I would serve it warm. So here I have some plain whipped cream. I didn't sweeten it, I just added a little bit of vanilla. One thing about this recipe is it has more of a satin finish. If you wanted it to be super, super glossy, like for serving, you could do a thin layer of like strained melted apricot. You could glaze it really. I don't think it needs it. I don't really need the extra sweetness at all. And I think it looks great as is. So I'm gonna cut a piece. Another great thing about that long bake is the pastry really, really cooks through. Like you don't really get that like unbaked layer. Look at how good that looks. It's not like the apples on the bottom are still apple colored. They've also absorbed the caramel. Oh, it looks so good. The pastry is super crisp. I'm gonna top it with a little bit of whipped cream. Vanilla ice cream also would be great. It's not super sweet. Like we made that caramel pretty dark. There's still all the steam coming up, but it's really hot. It's so special, and like that vanilla and that aged flavor of the apple cider vinegar, it's really seamless and harmonious, but like it's also super complex. Like if someone told me there was rum, like some kind of alcohol in here, I would believe them. The fruit flavors with the caramel and everything else, it's just kind of magical. Name a better dessert. I don't know that there is one. One thing I forgot to tell you that I want to mention is what is a stopping point if you want to break up the work. Once I had chilled the reduced caramel and I sliced all the apples and I arranged them over the caramel in the pan, that's a good stopping point. You can just cover it with foil and stick it in the fridge, and in 24 hours you can put the pastry on and bake it, and it's perfect. So you can divide it up. It's a fantastic, entertaining dessert. If you have company, I know we're like a long way off, but like Thanksgiving, feed a lot of people, it can't be beat. So if you want to get the full recipe, you can find it on nytcooking.com along with several of my other recipes. There's a gift link in the description below, so no paywall, anyone can access it. This one is a real winner. So I really hope you give it a try, and thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.